Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. We are diving into something super fascinating today, the rules of life. We're constantly surrounded by thousands of different things, objects, animals, natural wonders, but how often do we actually stop and ask ourselves what fundamentally separates the living from the non-living? Today, we're going to break down exactly how we categorize the world around us, and we'll do it using some really clear, undeniable criteria. Let's just jump right in. So, I want you to think about this for a second. Imagine a paper kite flying high up in the sky. It's dancing in the wind, darting around, and honestly, from a distance, it looks an awful lot like a bird. So here's the question. What makes the bird alive but the kite non-living? I mean, they both move, right? They're both up there in the air. It's actually a trickier question than it first appears. Answering this takes more than just a lucky guess. It really shows why we absolutely need a strict, criteria-based checklist to test the things we see every day.
And here is exactly how we're going to break things down for you today. First, we'll look at what actually makes things alive. Second, we'll compare natural versus man-made things. Third, we'll dive into the traits of life. Fourth, we'll examine movement and breathing. And finally, we'll wrap up with reproduction and lifespan.
All right, part one. What makes things alive? Let's figure out how we categorize our world. Moving right along to part two, natural or man-made. Basically, Earth versus human-built. So before we can even define life itself, it really helps to establish some baseline categories. Look, it's easy to look at a dog and say, alive, or look at a road and say, not alive. But first, we have to separate what the Earth gave us from what we built ourselves. Basically, we can divide our surroundings into two distinct groups. On one hand, we've got natural things. This includes the sun, the moon, the stars, plants, and animals. These are things that just exist in nature, totally without human intervention. On the other hand, we have man-made things. Think buildings, roads, cars, trains, airplanes, stuff crafted by human hands. Now here's the real kicker. Just because something is natural does not mean it's alive. The sun, the moon, the stars, even the Earth itself, they're entirely natural, but they are absolutely non-living. Which brings us to part three, the traits of life. This, right here, is our ultimate checklist. So, if being natural isn't enough to make something alive, well, what is? Enter our master list for investigating life. For something to truly be alive, it literally has to possess these 7 undeniable traits. Okay, ready? Living things grow, they move, they breathe, they need food and water, they feel and respond to changes, they reproduce, and eventually, they die. Let's just look at that first trait for a second. Growth. All living things change in shape and size over time, right? A newborn baby is tiny, but over the years they grow bigger, they learn to walk, and they become an adult. A tiny little seed grows into a massive plant. Now compare that to a non-living thing. A small wooden chair is never ever going to grow bigger on its own. It's just impossible. It totally lacks this fundamental trait of life. Okay, let's jump into part 4, movement and breathing. These are the really active survival traits. Let's zoom in on 2 of the most active, visible traits on our checklist. We'll start with movement. Ask yourself this. Does your backpack move around your house on its own? Is your car going to drive itself, well, without a human at the wheel or a computer doing the driving? No way. Non-living things just cannot move on their own, but living things absolutely can. In animals and humans, this specific type of movement, getting from one physical spot to another, is called locomotion. Humans walk on 2 legs, birds use their wings to fly, fish use fins to swim. But here's the thing. They aren't just moving around randomly. There's a massive biological purpose here. Animals use locomotion to search for food and water, to find shelter, or to run away from an enemy. Their survival literally depends on this movement. But hold on, we need to address a pretty major biological exception here. We just established that living things move from place to place. But wait a second, plants are living things, and they're literally rooted to the ground. So how on earth does that work? Well, plants might not move from one physical location to another, but they do move their parts. A plant sitting in the shade will actively grow and stretch its leaves toward the sunlight. And my absolute favorite example of this is the touch-me-not plant, or Mimosa pudica. If you even just lightly touch the leaves of this plant, they instantly close up and droop. It's like magic, but it's biology. It is clearly moving, feeling, and responding, even without walking around. And that brings us to breathing, which is another absolutely vital trait. Humans and a lot of animals breathe using lungs. Fish use gills to breathe underwater. Grasshoppers actually use these special little air holes. But what about plants? I mean, do plants breathe? Absolutely they do. But obviously, they don't have tiny noses or lungs.
Instead, they breathe through these microscopic little pores on the surface of their leaves called stomata. It's a completely different biological setup, but it achieves the exact same required rule of life.
All right, on to our final section, part 5, reproduction and lifespan. We're looking at the macro cycle of life now. So, stepping back from those day-to-day survival traits, let's look at the bigger picture. The absolute crucial point here is that living things must ensure their species continues to exist, and they do this through reproduction. Now, this happens in wonderfully diverse ways all across the natural world. Humans and many animals, like elephants, give birth to live young. Birds, like hens, lay eggs that eventually hatch into babies. And most plants reproduce by dropping seeds that eventually sprout and grow into brand new plants. Non-living things, though, whether it's a high-tech computer or just a rock sitting in the dirt, they simply do not reproduce. Period. But, as we know, life isn't permanent. All living things have a lifespan. This is basically the clock running from the moment they're born, through their period of growth, all the way to their inevitable eventual death. And the length of this lifespan, it varies wildly. Some animals, like tortoises and elephants, they stick around for a really long time. Certain trees, like banyan and peepal trees, have incredibly long lives, sometimes spanning literal centuries. Non-living things, on the other hand, well, they don't die because they were never actually alive to begin with. And speaking of lifespans, this brings up one of the most mind-blowing contrasts in all of nature.
So while a banyan tree can live for hundreds of years, consider the mayfly. It's perfectly nicknamed the one-day insect for a reason. It has a spectacularly short lifespan of just 24 hours. I mean, imagine that. Its entire biological cycle, birth, growth, reproduction, and death, happens in a single rotation of the Earth. It really just goes to show how incredibly diverse the rules of life can be when you see them in action.
Okay, let's tie this all together. We can actually test everyday objects against our new checklist. We just use a simple grid and ask the fundamental questions. Does it breathe? Does it eat? Does it move? Does it reproduce? For the fly and the bird, it's a resounding yes across the board. They are living. For the clock and the balloon, it is a hard no. They are definitely non-living. But then we have the flower. Now, while it doesn't eat in the exact same way an animal does, because plants famously make their own food, it definitely breathes, it moves its parts, and it reproduces, making it absolutely 100% living. This is exactly how scientists categorize the world. I want to wrap up this explainer by turning the investigation entirely over to you. Take a look at this question straight from our source material. Water in a river can move rapidly. It can change its appearance. It can even change its shape depending on the container it's in or if it freezes into solid ice. But based on the strict 7-trait checklist we just built today, is water a living thing? I highly encourage you to mentally run water through that checklist right now. Does it breathe? Does it grow on its own? Does it reproduce? I hope this breakdown completely changes how you look at the objects around you. Keep analyzing, keep asking those big questions, and I will catch you in the next one.